So now I am delighted to introduce you to our speaker for today, Caroline Ouwerkerk. She's a career and confidence coach for young professionals seeking more fulfilling work and lives. Through one-on-one coaching, online courses, and in-person workshops, Caroline's on a mission to help young professionals find new opportunities that maximize their talents while creating space for all of their other priorities. She specializes in moving on from your first job, social impact careers, managing imposter syndrome, and discerning whether graduate school is right for you. Caroline leverages nearly 15 years of experience as a student, staff, and instructor at 3 of the nation's top 10 research universities. She received her AB in history from the University of Chicago, her master's in higher education administration from University of Pennsylvania. She also has a certificate in creative writing from the Graham School and a certificate from UChicago Booth School of Business Executive Program for Emerging Leaders. That is a mouthful. She is well credentialed. Caroline, thank you so much for joining. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I think that, you know, the shorter version of that bio is that I'm just a lifelong learner who can't stop taking classes, and I'm sure that resonates with many of you as well, but it's definitely lots of fun. I didn't even add my 6-year streak on Duolingo to that bio yet, so here we go. I am so excited to be here today. I know many people view networking as something you're either good at or you're not, and in most cases as a bit of a necessary evil. But today I want to share with you a different approach to networking, and one that I'm hoping will make your interactions more strategic, more effective, and way less awkward. I am delighted to have so many people on the call today, and especially so many names that I'm familiar with. So it's really cool to see all of you. And if I don't know you already, I'd love to connect after the session is over as well. So great. Okay. Oh. Really good at being a career coach, not as great at the tech piece. So I've organized this workshop around the 5 W's of networking. So we're going to talk about what networking is and why it's important. We're going to talk about why it's inherently awkward, when to do it, who you should be networking with, and where to find those people. And then in the second part of the workshop, we're going to dig into the how of effective networking. I'm going to share 10 habits of effective networking, and then we'll have some time to put the theory into practice. Just like Sam just mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, so please be sure to jot down any questions you have as we go along. And we have plenty of time for Q&A, and that's often the most generative part of these kinds of conversations. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. As I mentioned, I've pulled together a workbook. So Sam dropped a link to that in the chat. So please feel free to grab that. And if you're watching this later, you'll be able to download the workbook from my website at the link that's on your screen, which will also be in the description of this video on YouTube. So I've got a couple of goals for our session today. I'd like for you to identify one action item around networking that you plan on taking in the next 48 hours, one action item in the next week, and then one action item in the next 2 weeks. Because although we're living this virtual world these days, there's still plenty of work that can be done in the networking space, even virtually. And it's really important that you walk away with clear action items, because we could all spend forever watching webinars all day long, but if you don't put the theory into practice, it's all for naught. So as Sam mentioned, I'm a career and confidence coach. I'm based in Baltimore, but I work with clients worldwide, from Singapore to the UK, to the Netherlands, to Canada, to across the United States. And I work with folks in a variety of industries, including tech, higher ed, archaeology, construction, and startups. Nearly all of the folks that I work with have a social impact or sustainability interest. And I work with people one-on-one on a variety of topics, whether that's, like Sam mentioned, finding a more fulfilling role, overcoming imposter syndrome, or applying for grad school. And I also, I have a bunch of different ways to work with me. So I've put them all on my website that I've spent a lot of time updating. So please please feel free to check it out and be in contact if you want to talk further. Lastly, I'm really excited to be back with the Alumni Career Programs Office for the third time. So if you like this workshop, if you get a kick out of workshops with a bit of sarcasm and memes, please check out the other 2 webinars I've done for UChicago. So I did one on standing out from the crowd and the other on overcoming imposter syndrome. And you can find links to both of those on my website and on the UChicago YouTube page. Basically wherever you find this if you're watching it later. So with that, let's dive in. So in order to make networking less awkward, we need to know why it's so awkward in the first place. And it's not just because we're all U of C alumni. I feel like this is what a lot of people think of when they think of networking. It feels like at some level it's a game where your goal is to give away as many business cards as possible with this vague premise that someday maybe one of the connections in your network will lead to a job offer. I know I used to give out my business cards and say, I have to give all of these away because before I reorder them, they'll give me a promotion and I'll have a title change, right? But that's it. It can also feel like, networking is in the form of these informational interviews because you've heard that informational interviews are what you're supposed to do. But unless you get a literal job offer in the middle of an informational interview, it's hard to tell if you're doing it right. So networking is awkward because often the payoff comes much later. And it also tends to be awkward because most people don't prepare effectively, whether we're talking about one-on-one informational interviews or their more casual cousin, the networking event. In both situations, there's often this elephant in the room of at least one party looking for a job or an introduction. And that often leads the job searcher to be talking about themselves too much or otherwise using that time inefficiently. So if networking is going to be more effective, what we really need is a mindset shift. Our goal is to be having real conversations with real people. It's important to let go of any expectations as to where that conversation is going. We need to lose this idea that it's some sort of real world chess game where we're trying to connect with this person who can introduce us to that person and eventually profit. And instead really get back to this idea of real conversations with real people. Overall, our goal is that we're working to increase the likelihood that someone will open our email or take our call at some point in the future. And actually connecting with people on a human level is going to be what helps make that happen. This kind of networking can help you get jobs, of course, but since you'll have an actual human on the inside who can help you navigate the situation. But networking also will help you stay on top of trends and important players in your industry. And regularly having these kinds of networking conversations will also allow you to stay visible and increases the likelihood you'll be able to help others as well. So that brings us to the next W, which is when to be networking. And as you've probably already guessed, networking is most effective when it's an ongoing practice, not just something you do when you're job hunting. Participating regularly in casual networking events, such as, and I promise Sam did not ask me to include this, but networking events organized by the UChicago Alumni Association or events organized by your industry's professional association or things like that. Incorporating those regularly into your schedule, even just once a quarter, can be dramatically beneficial if you're planning on finding a new job at some point in the next few years. And to be honest, that's likely to be most of us, right? So now that we've talked about why networking is so important and why it should be an ongoing practice, I want to talk a little bit about who you should be networking with and where to find those people. So there's a really helpful framework that I use with many of my career coaching clients. It's called the 2-hour job search. And it offers this very efficient process for organizing your job hunt by rapidly generating a large pool of target companies and then prioritizing them by a few different metrics. So namely, the likelihood that they're hiring and whether you have any connections at that organization. I would like to say that there are definitely some gaps in the 2-hour job search method. So I find it helpful to use in conjunction with other tools. But overall, I think that their approach to networking in particular can be really helpful. The most useful takeaway from this book is the idea of categorizing your connections into 3 types of people. So we've got advocates, obligers, and curmudgeons. So curmudgeons are people who are just not going to help you. They don't reply to your email. They're disinvested from their organization. They don't like helping people, whatever. They're just not going to do it for you. Obligers are people who feel obligated. They're going to respond to your email, but it might take forever, or they're doing it as a favor, but they're for whatever reason very ineffective. They're doing it out of obligation and not really out of any sort of longer motivation to actually help you. Advocates, as you might imagine, they're the group to focus on. So these are the folks who will send an email to HR to be on the lookout for your application, or give you inside tips on navigating the recruitment process. I think it's important to take a look at this kind of categorization, because the sooner you can determine whether a contact is a curmudgeon or an obliger, the sooner you can move on to connecting with someone who is more likely to help you, rather than getting fixated on, like, this person must help me because they're in the perfect position to be useful to my search. To put this a different way, the point of networking, and especially informational interviews, is to have real conversations with real people so that you can turn strangers into advocates. This is a really important point. So I'd encourage you to reflect and think about any connections you've had in the past where you've seen this play out, right? Where you've seen people who were strangers turn into advocates for you throughout your career. People might be advocates for any number of reasons. They might just be naturally motivated to help others in their careers, a future career coach in the making. They might connect with you as a favor to a friend. But one really common point there is that it's likely you have something in common with an advocate. So in the 2-hour job search, the focus is on mining your alumni network for advocates. So he has this process of identifying and generating a rapid list of alumni who might be potentially helpful to you. And I promise I'm sharing this not just because we're on an alumni webinar, but I think it really is a useful strategy. So LinkedIn has some really great features that will help you with this process. So you can navigate to the UChicago page on LinkedIn and click on alumni, which you can see I have highlighted here, and sort by all kinds of different parameters. So when someone graduated, where they live now, people you have in common. You can type in really specific keywords into the box here and find just a wealth of really interesting people. And as far as I can tell, every university has this kind of page on LinkedIn. So it's just a really helpful feature. I also think I learned this from you, Sam. So this is a really great way to circle back as well. But of course, you can easily find potential advocates by reaching out to your friends and asking if they can connect you with someone who does X, or joining social groups related to your interest areas. The bottom line takeaway of this is that it's really important to understand that not everyone you might network with is equally helpful, and that finding genuine points of connection increases the likelihood that someone will want to become an advocate for you. And we're going to work on finding those points of connection in just a few minutes. So now that we've dug into what networking is, why you should do it, and with whom, let's get to the how, as in how to make networking less awkward. So I've organized these tips roughly into before, during, and after you network. And some of these strategies are useful mostly for informational interview type situations, while others are better suited for casual networking moments, and some are relevant for both. So the first habit of networking is make it easy to say yes. You're asking someone to do you a favor by meeting with you, of course. So make it less awkward by reducing the amount of work that they need to do to help you out. I know this sounds really basic, but it's shocking to me the number of messages I've had throughout my career where, you know, it's just very, very vague. And it's really, I have to do a lot of legwork to be able to connect with this person. So be clear about your goal. Don't say something like, I'd love to connect, when what you really mean is, would you be open to having a 20-minute informational interview with me? If you want to meet them because you're exploring a different industry, say that. If you already applied for a job at that company, be upfront about that too. If you're making it easy to say yes by also coming up with some sort of common ground that you have with them, even if it's just straight up flattery, like I love your work, or, you know, I loved your webinar, right? And show it helps show that you're a human and not that you didn't just find them at random. It's also really important that you handle the logistics. So start the conversation, save some time by suggesting some times that would work for your schedule, and setting up the details of the call. Don't like, you can save a lot of legwork and back and forth by just kind of leading with that. And then of course, if we're ever in the situation where we're actually able to meet people in real life again, you buy the coffee. So I think that, oh look, I had a slide with all this on there. So one of the other things that I would mention on this end is that this is a great time to update your LinkedIn profile to make it desirable for other folks to want to agree to meet with you. So make sure that you've optimized your LinkedIn profile so that it's relevant and obvious why you want to connect with folks. So the second habit is to do your homework. Don't waste your time or theirs by asking questions that you could have Googled. It's really surprising. This is a very common thing, but an informational interview is actually a really great opportunity to investigate what I like to call your hunches. So these are the assumptions that you have, whether it's about the industry or about the company, that you're looking to either confirm or disprove. So when you're thinking about transitioning to another organization or industry, what is it that you think you know? Or another way of thinking about this is what is it that you want to be true about that industry? So instead of asking like, do you have great work-life balance? Ask, you know, do you work on the weekends? Do you have to take work home with you? You know, how are you, to what end are you trying to ask those questions? You're never going to completely understand what a company is like until you actually work there, but you're looking to get, the point of that informational interview is to help you feel more confident about the direction you're going in. I often say that research is the most seductive form of procrastination, and you can do informational interviews forever. So it's much more helpful if you get clear on what you're expecting to hear and why you're asking these questions, so that you're making the best use of your time. Be sure to prepare in advance. Winging it will not serve you. The third habit is to help them help you. So this applies whether we're talking about a casual networking event or a one-on-one informational interview. Most people want to be helpful, even if they are curmudgeons, but most people want to be helpful. And so get clear on what it is that you want so that they can turn around and help tell your story to someone else. That's the magic of networking. So be clear on that takeaway so that they can then share it with other folks. I like to call this your career thesis statement, and it's a short summary that captures your skills and what it is you're looking for. And if you can make it effective and snappy, it's much easier for someone else to help you out. So for example, you could say, I'm looking for a role in a consumer goods company that will build on my data analysis skills. That's a much more efficient career thesis statement than saying something like, I want to move to Chicago, or I want to use my communication skills, right? So figuring out the really clear goal of what you're looking for is absolutely essential and helps other people help you out. It makes it easier for other folks to share your story. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the career thesis. Here's a fill in the blank kind of template for what your career thesis statement might look like. This is also in the worksheet as well. And it's just a generally, in my opinion, really helpful foundational tool to use regardless of where you are in your job search. But this is doing your homework of getting clear on what it is you want will make it so much easier for other folks to help you out. So the fourth habit is to manage your time. So be clear about how much time you're asking for upfront and then stick to it. So it's much easier to say yes to someone if they're asking for a 20-minute conversation and you stop it at 20 minutes, which means you're holding to your word, than it is to be like, am I committing to an hour? Am I committing to half an hour? Like what's going on here, right? So being clear on what you're asking for is really helpful. You've got enough time to ask about 4 or 5 really solid questions that you've prepared in advance. And that last question should be around whether that person has anyone else that you should be talking to or anything else that you should be looking up or researching. It's also important to understand that as the person who initiated the informational interview, you're in charge of the flow of the conversation. So make sure that you're not putting the burden on them again to steer that conversation and make it a good use of everyone's time. It's really important that you contribute to the conversation as well. So it's really easy to fall into this pattern or this paradigm or this habit of you are the person asking all the questions and they're the person who has all the knowledge. And it's going to serve you a lot better if you're approaching this from the space of the fact that you have skills and insights that you can contribute as well. You're bringing your own skills and background to the table and you have a lot to contribute. So strive to make that conversation mutually beneficial. I will say that there is a caveat to that, which is it's a fine balance between contributing and talking too much. This is a lot of people end up spending the whole conversation pitching themselves. And then that makes it really awkward too, because the informational interviewee can't get a word in edgewise, right? So remember what we've been talking about of this real conversations with real people. How can you be careful to ask people questions without talking too much yourself? So you're contributing, but not, but being careful to pay attention to how much time you spend talking. So when you're networking, whether it's a 20-minute informational interview or a casual networking happy hour, finding common ground is a really great place to start. So identifying different points of connection is a very effective way of turning a stranger into an advocate. We're going to be practicing this in just a moment, but it's amazing how quickly you can form a connection when you come from this place of looking for commonality. Especially when you go deeper than the most obvious connections, like the fact that you have a university in common or other things that you can find on your resume. I used to do an activity with my students called Your New Best Friend, and I would ask pairs of students to spend about 5 minutes figuring out 3 things that they had in common with each other that were more specific than just we go to the same school. And it was fascinating to me, that strategy of you're approaching a conversation much differently if you're looking for what do we have in common, as opposed to just kind of treating it more casually and kind of rambly of seeing how the conversation goes. So approaching it with that curiosity is really generative. So being curious. So along those lines, being a connector is also really important. Listening to what other people might be looking for and then offering suggestions or resources that can help them. At one point, I had business cards that were that opened up. So they had my information on the outside, and then on the inside they were blank, because I just found myself writing so many different resources down for people that I just decided to get more real estate on my card and be able to write them on the inside. And that was actually really effective, because then people would take my business card and look up those resources and then, call me later. I'm not saying you have to do that, but look for ways that you can help other folks out and share resources with people, because that is a way of making that connection more genuine. Your experience with networking is going to be a lot more effective if you take the responsibility for follow-up. So of course, if you're doing an informational interview, sending a thank you note is important, and sending it quickly is very, very important. But it's even better if you leave your conversation with a reason to email your contact and then actually do it, right? So it can be directly linked to what we just talked about with giving people resources. So you send them a follow-up email and you say, here are those resources I suggested for you. But regardless, figuring out some way that you can keep that conversation going is really helpful. If you're talking to someone and they have offered to introduce you to someone else, I recommend a 2-email strategy. So the first email being a private thank you note just to them that says, thank you so much for your time, whatever, I really enjoyed it. And then at the bottom of that email saying, thanks also for being willing to introduce me to Joe Biden. I really appreciate it. I'm going to send a follow-up email that will be easy for you to forward. And then you send them a follow-up email that's written to them, but is designed to be forwarded, right? And includes whatever materials you want Joe Biden to see on your behalf, right? So making it easy for them to help you out is really, really important. And that's one strategy for doing it, where you're kind of doing that double email strategy. I've had a lot of success with that. Joe Biden was the only person I could think of right now. Oprah would be a really great person. Lots of different folks that you could connect with. Our second to last habit is closing the loop. So this is my personal pet peeve about networking events, which is that you have an informational interview with them, you've taken this time to meet with someone, and now you're invested in their trajectory, right? So close the loop and follow up with that person later. So helping them understand how their advice helped you, right? So looping back and saying, I took your advice and this is what happened, or I decided to apply for that job and this is what happened. It's really a simple step, but it's truly the difference between feeling like the conversation was just transactional and actually starting to develop a relationship with someone. And I especially want to mention that you should follow up even if you don't have good news to report. So you had an informational interview with someone, you applied for a job at their company, you didn't get it. Don't necessarily assume that A, that person knows that you didn't get it, or B, that they're not interested in hearing from you. So following back up with them and saying, I didn't get the role, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about it. And honoring that, closing that loop can be super helpful. You never know if they're going to come back at you and say, oh, well, I heard about this other role, or, you should connect with this person. But it can be really challenging when you take time to talk with folks and then it just kind of is dangling. I know I've definitely still thought about folks that I talked to, and I'm like, did they ever get that job? I hope they did, and sort of closing that loop is just a really nice way to finish that conversation. People love hearing that you act on their suggestions, and people are invested. So the last habit of effective networking is to make sure that you do your part. So you can't be a curmudgeon to others and expect people to be advocates for you. So it's all part of the process, and it's just so important to help welcome other folks in and connect the dots and be generous with that conversation, because you never know how it's going to go. And if we go back to that mindset shift I spoke about at the beginning of letting go of expectations of where things are going to end up, ends up just reaping huge benefits. If we're ever able to see each other in person again, being generous can also look like noticing that someone is standing in the corner feeling awkward and generously inviting them into your conversation, right? You might be standing in the corner talking to someone you already know, which we often do at networking events, even though that is, not necessarily the most effective use of time. But being there and generously inviting other folks in to join your conversation it can be absolutely transformative, and it will pay off over time. So I have one more bonus habit, which is that it's absolutely essential to practice. So networking gets easier the more you do it. And it takes time to have that mindset shift of, I'm just having real conversations with real people, and I'm letting go of expectations for where things are going to go. That doesn't come overnight. And the more you can practice, the less awkward it gets. There are lots of really great ways to do this kind of practice. These UChicago events are one example. I have a list of other places to look for, especially online networking events, in the workbook, so you can check that out as well. But just getting into that habit of doing it regularly, and it will get better over time. Okay, so I just talked about a lot, but now that we've had now that we've talked through these 10 strategies for making networking less awkward, I wanted to take a few minutes to put this theory into action, and actually practice what we're talking about. So in just a minute, Sam is going to help me break the group up into breakout rooms, and we're going to practice networking by practicing networking. Okay, so in your booklet, there are examples for what I'd like to encourage you to talk about. But in particular, I'd like to encourage you to think about your career thesis statement and share that with other folks. And then I'd also like to encourage you to find what you have in common with the other people in your room. You're going to have about 8 minutes in the breakout room to share those 2 pieces of information. But if you have any additional time, I'd like to challenge you to take a moment to reflect on when you've had some positive networking experiences in the past, and how that has benefited your career. We're going to do those breakouts, and then we're going to come back and do a bit of a recap of our conversation, and then use the rest of our time to do some deep question and answer.
We just had a little short speed networking session for about 8 minutes or so. Caroline here is just going to finish up with a last presentation, and then we're going to do a Q&A. So feel free, anyone, you can have your camera on or off, and then I just encourage you to mute yourself until you are called on to ask Caroline a question if you've got one.
Do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm very interested in the topic that Caroline just talked about closed loop, because I feel like this is a part that most of us haven't been paying attention, or, because of like imposter syndromes, we are too afraid of paying more attention. The biggest thing is I find myself, I have such concerns. For example, if I follow up with some things that I fail something, maybe this will, have a negative influence or impression on me. Or sometimes, I don't have a successful follow up with them. I'm worrying that I may just waste of their time. So what do you think?
I think that's a great question. And my response basically is that everyone is so information overloaded that if they're not interested in paying attention to you, they're not going to pay attention to you. So if you are sharing a failure and people aren't interested, they're just not going to hear it, right? People who want to see you succeed will want to see you succeed regardless of if you are sharing a setback or a success. And I don't know. I think that's just the way to approach it, is that I think it becomes more challenging if you decide not to close that loop and just kind of leave people hanging, because they're invested in your success and are interested. If they've taken that time to meet with you, it's likely that they're interested in actually helping you out. So that's actually a great segue to our question and answer segment, Sam. I'm working on 2 different screens, so it's challenging to make sure that we're going in the right direction. But just jumping into that question and answer session, we talked about a lot of different things today, between why networking is awkward and how it's just really important that we're trying to make these real connections with real people, and letting go of our expectations of where that's going to go. We talked about how it's important to network regularly and not just when you're job hunting, and let go of the fact that not everyone's going to want to be an advocate, and that's okay. And then we talked about these 10 habits of effective networking. I'm a historian, not a mathematician, which is why there are 11 habits on the 10 habit list. But I think it's really important to practice implementing these into your process. So with that being said, let's transition into what actions you're going to take. So in the workbook, there's a page that encourages you to think about what actions you will take to implement a different networking strategy, either in the short term and in the longer term, and just remembering that it gets better with practice. I have lots of more resources on my website, and lots of information and various worksheets and downloads that you can get. You can follow me on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I have more information on my website about one-on-one coaching, ongoing coaching options, and imposter syndrome, which Wanlin just mentioned as well. I have an online self-paced course about imposter syndrome that can also be a resource for folks as well. So with that, let's move into questions and answers. So I would be happy to answer lots of questions. The only thing I can't tell you is why my cat was sitting in the dishwasher.
Love it. Let's start with a cat pick. That always works. Caroline, we have one question here that we'll kick off from Paul in the chat. And then to anyone else on the line, if you'd like to share a question in the chat, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, if you click on the reactions button on your Zoom toolbar, you'll also see the button that says raise hand. So if you'd like to get on screen and ask your question directly, I encourage you to raise your hand and do so. But for now, let's start, Caroline, with this question from Paul in the chat here, and there's quite a few questions bundled into one. So maybe particularly, I think it touches on making a direct ask to your networking contacts, asking them for contacts or referrals, asking them, for something that you are looking for in your job search, especially if you don't know someone that well. How do you navigate that? It's a tough thing to do. Yeah,
I think that's a great question. So I'm reading, I just pulled it up in the chat. So so I think that this question is asking how do you ask for contacts or referrals, and how do you handle this, especially if you don't know them? I think it's great to be transparent. I mean, if people are approaching you for referrals to other folks, I think it's really important to kind of develop a way that you're planning on handling that, right? So if it's your kind of policy to just not, maybe you're not at a season of your life where you have the energy or brain space to do those kinds of referrals, that might be where you are. But I think that's really where, as for sort of getting other people to connect with you when you're reaching out, I think it's really important to come from that space of being genuine and really focusing on that area of connection. So flattery is really great, right? So you can look them up. You can see what they've written online. You can look for, you can say, I read that thing you wrote, or, I saw your comment here and I was really interested, and I'm looking to make a move in the next couple of months or years, and being, really transparent about it. I think, I think that in this kind of situation, that transparency can really be helpful. If you're cautious, right? So you're probably going to be doing a job search shortly, but you're not ready to declare it from the rooftops. I've had great success saying literally that, right? Of I'm likely to be starting a job search soon, but I'm not ready to shout it from the rooftops, right? And helping people, you know, bringing people into your space where you're saying that, and being upfront about what that looks like to you can be really helpful. And then just kind of understanding that not everyone is going to be interested in networking with you, and that's okay.
Here's another great question that actually got upvoted in the chat. If you have not been networking for a while, if you have an old contact, do you have any advice on rekindling that relationship and how to approach someone that you haven't chatted with in a while?
I think, again, the transparency piece is really key there. So I applied for a job, and I found out that there was someone in the office that I hadn't talked to in like 10 years, but I sent them an email and I got an interview for the role. I sent them an email and I said, it's been a while since we met at this thing. And I wanted to let you know that since then I've done X, Y, and Z. I was looking, I'm about to start a job search. I'm not ready to shout it from the rooftops, but I saw this opportunity at your organization, and I wanted to let you know that I've submitted my application. I really hope you're doing well, you know, and then just kind of letting it go from there. Interestingly enough, that person never actually responded to my email, but HR invited me for an interview, right? So you never know sort of where it's going to go, but being transparent, like just because it's been a minute since you've talked to that person doesn't mean you can never talk to them again, right? You don't have to say like a whole backstory, but you can just be really, you know, efficient, right? So since we spoke, I've done this, this, and that thing, and then just diving right into it.
There's a few questions in the chat about networking in this digital age here. How do you see, Caroline, social media as a networking tool, or perhaps any other networking tools? I know UChicago, for example, has a connection with Lunch Club, which is a really cool AI software that will connect you with other potential networking connections. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think that that's one of the really exciting things about the digital world, is that you can meet people all over the world, and that could be really that's really just neat. I know next week, for example, I'm speaking at a networking event that is, well, it's physically located on the internet, but originally was in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and I just think it's so cool that I can participate in something that is usually many thousands of miles away. But the question there was around how do you do it digitally? And I think it's just really important to be respectful of time, and keep to that short period of time, so that you can be really efficient that way. In terms of actually reaching out to people, I saw something that took me a minute to realize that was probably actually sent to all of this person's contacts. But basically, someone on LinkedIn said, it's been a while since we connected, Caroline, and I wanted to reach out, or he didn't even use my name. It's been a while since we connected and I wanted to reach out and see how you've been doing. But the way that it was written, like he must have sent it to like all these people, but it took me a while to realize that it was like probably a mass message. And I actually responded back saying, oh, you know, I'm doing this and that. And it was an interesting way to start the conversation, right? So that's been really effective as well.
I agree. I think this digital opportunity kind of gives us a chance to reconnect and make it less awkward. And so if you're the kind of person who can jump on it and kind of take advantage of that, it could be a cool thing. I will do perhaps one more question here. What do we do if the networking is just a dud? How do we get out of this? What do we move forward with? Like, what does the follow-up look like? Can you share your thoughts there?
Yeah, you know, again, sometimes it's a dud for a variety of reasons, but thanking the people, you know, thanking it for your time, and just saying that you decided to move in a different direction, right? I think often we spend a lot more time focusing on these interactions than other people, like, you know, than the person that you were networking with or the person who introduced you to someone else. Like, it's not, everybody's moving so quickly that it's not like they're necessarily, you know, going through a Rolodex of keeping track of who you've connected with whom. And so kind of circling back saying like, I really appreciate the conversation, and now this is what I'm doing next, and you don't necessarily have to give a status report to the person who introduced you. You can close the loop without giving too much away, right? And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Awesome. Well, that is all that we have time for today. I am so grateful for everyone on the line here for not only jumping on and learning something new, but also for taking some time to connect and to put into practice some of the learning that Caroline was able to share with us today. Caroline, an especially big thank you to you for sharing your expertise and your insights with us today.
Thank you. And I just wanted to point out one comment that I saw in the chat here. Amy, I love your idea of sending people an electronic coffee gift card. I think that's brilliant. Depending on what your resources look like, I think that can be super helpful. And or even just saying like the next time we meet in person, I think that'll be good. But I know that there's a lot of questions here, and someday maybe, Sam, we can just do a giant Q&A the whole time. But I appreciate you having me here, and I hope to connect with many of you after this. So again, please feel free to reach out. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, visit my website and let me know if you have additional questions. I will share the caveat that I have a new baby, so I'm a little bit slower on email than I have been in the past, but hopefully I'll be able to type with 2 hands again soon. So thank you in the meantime.
And I will be sharing a recording of this great session, as well as Caroline's workbook, some recap docs, and a lot of really great helpful links to Caroline's site, and then also to future networking opportunities that you can join with UChicago to continue practicing. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Awesome.